Okay, about 10 minutes until coming back together. It's still a beautiful day, not too hot, not too cold. And this retreat, for some people, 1-day retreat. For some people, it's a 9-day retreat. For some people, just plugging in whenever they can. And everybody's able to plug in different ways. And of course, the last day of the retreat being a bhikkhu ordination. So the day 9 will be a little bit different than all the other days. And even though certain things that we're able to do here at Abhayagiri, they may not be prerequisites for being practitioners, but still can be skillful means. So using nature, when we go on these nature walks, we can learn how to use nature to keep the mind bright and clear and also develop a sense of ease. Found listening to the birds is a good way to keep the mind sharp. Trying to identify different birds, different bird calls, and some of them are quite interesting. If we don't really focus on what the birds are saying, we might just think there's maybe only 2 or 3 different types of birds in the forest. They all kind of sound the same. They all just sort of tweet away. But actually there's a huge variety of birds singing in the forest. So there's birds that have incredibly complex songs, and there's I believe it's called the oak titmouse. That particular bird has an unbelievable song, and these birds, they actually practice their songs. They have a morning song, an evening song. So these oak titmouses, they actually have this incredibly complex song, and one of them will belt it out, and they have like competitions, and one of them will sing the song, and then another one will try to match it, but better, and they'll go back and forth like that until there's a winner. And I don't know.
The bird realm of Malam.
It's like bird Malam. Yeah, it's like bird Malam, and if you know how to identify them and listen to it, it's really amazing. And I don't know how the winner is. I guess maybe one of them just gets worn out and passes out or something, and falls off its branch. And then the other one is the winner. Yeah, so this is very much perhaps the Malam singers actually got that from studying nature. They actually developed their Lao-style rap-offs. That is hundreds of year old traditional Laotian rap that they do freestyle. And not only do you try to rhyme, but you try to work the tones in there as well. And of course, Ajahn Mun was a Malam singer, so there's some of that, and you get some of that in his biography. Yeah. I know Oprah Jamnian would talk about that. Like, these people can sing all night, but you can't meditate all night. They can dance all night, but you can't meditate all night. So we don't see it as fun. So we'll wait for a few more minutes. Okay, looks like we're all gathered. You can begin with the Dhamma Talk request.
Brahma Jalo Gadi Pati Saham Pati Katanjali Anadi Varang Ayajata Santida Sattaparaja Kajatika Te Setu Damang Anukampimang Pajang.
Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. We're well into the 9 days of Dhamma, about 2/3 of the way through of this practice session. It's been quite wonderful, really, to just be practicing together. So often, the daily routine of the monastery, I think, is oriented towards accomplishing the tasks that need to be done, and framed by morning puja, evening puja, and periods of the solitary afternoon practice. So it's not all that common that we have full days of practice together, and have, particularly the past couple of years, this is the first time that we've actually had a number of people on site for practice periods throughout this week. So it's been really nice to have part of the opening up since the past year and a half or so in this way. And there's been a lot of remembrances and reflections of the past 25 years of Abhayagiri, since before we even opened, up through the opening day and the first number of years. And various members of our wide community have come and spent a day here and there, and Santideva, Fred, was part of the Sanghapala Foundation since before the monastery opened. So it's great to see him, and we had others like Sisakun was here the other day, and others come and go. And I don't think I'll go into any major remembrances of events that helped us get started in forms. We've heard a lot about that, so I don't know if I have all that much more to add to the historical perspective. But just to remark on one thing in particular that I thought it would be nice to just talk about a bit today was a very important part of our community that has evolved over the years. And both Lungpa and Ajahn Yanako have referred to it, and I thought I'd just maybe kind of talk about it a little bit more, and that's that the monastery is really all about the people and the community. We've got, of course, lovely physical facilities, all the requisites, but it wouldn't be anything without the people, without the community. And I think that we've put a lot of conscious effort into that aspect, starting right at the beginning with Ajahn Amaro and Lungpa coming together and working out a working relationship with each other that involved a lot of mutual respect for each other, and their relationship as coabits was a model for us to follow, to see how people could work together skeptical, I think, that it could work. I think one comparison or one simile that was put out there was this like putting together two tigers in the same cage, having two very strong leaders share leadership. Wasn't something that was predicted to work out so well, but Lungpa and Ajahn Amaro made it work very well. And that was quite a guiding influence for how we in the community were to develop our relationships with each other. So communal harmony has been a very big and important part of establishing our life here. And that's certainly, we've had many ups and downs and community difficulties, and it's not been necessarily an easy go, but that commitment to keep on making it work and working out the wrinkles as they come up has been a hallmark, I think, of our monastery. The Buddha talks about harmony, establishing harmony in all the communities. Of course, he emphasized communal harmony in terms of the monastic communities, because that was what he was setting up primarily. But all of the principles that he talked about in terms of how to establish community harmony really apply in the greater world for the whole assembly of practitioners in our traditions. And so the same principles can apply to family life or to intentional communities or to communal living situations, or even to places like workplaces, any place where people gather together. There are certain guidelines that the Buddha offered that make life just a whole lot more easy, and emphasizing just the prioritizing of harmony in community and people living together. More important than many aspects of the practice and the teachings. The Buddha was incredibly practical. He not only taught a really profound Dhamma teaching for the true liberation of the heart, but he was also incredibly practical in laying down many different ideas about how to live together in community. In particular, for the monastics, the Vinaya, the code of discipline, with all of its protocols and practical suggestions that Ajahn Yanaka was referring to in the Core Wat, the monastery procedures and protocols that just help grease the wheels of good communication and acting together in a harmonious way. And then also taking into account our individual cultural needs as a Western community. I think, I've spent a little bit of time in Thailand, not a huge amount, but enough to get a flavor, and have heard many times from others who have spent much more time there how different, in a way, the Thai cultural conditioning is around groups and people, and that there's much less of an individual need, or a need to express one's individuality, and much more of an emphasis on blending together and establishing oneself as part of a group, kind of losing oneself, letting go of one's individual needs to express, identity or establish oneself as a singular being, and more emphasis on how to blend together and be with each other and live together in close quarters, much more so than Westerners are conditioned to. So we've had to put some special conscious care and effort into establishing how to live together in some very close quarters without having that kind of training since our childhood, much more of the individual looking out for oneself as an individual. So that's a real learning curve, I think, for a lot of people in the West, and particularly here in the monastic community, and in the early days, and even now to some extent, we have some fairly tight spaces that we all have to kind of negotiate around, and a lot of emphasis on communal activity. Some monasteries in the Thai forest tradition have much more of an emphasis on individual solitary practice. And Ajahn Chah hallmark was always emphasizing the communal aspect of the practice. So we find ourselves spending quite a bit of time together and needing to learn how to do that smoothly. One of the teachings that the Buddha gives around this whole theme of living together harmoniously came as a result of a conflict in the monastic sangha. At one point, many people are probably familiar with the quarrel at Kosambi, where two groups of monks were divided against each other based on just a disagreement on a very small Vinaya question. And it ended up being people taking sides and having very strong views and opinions and engaging in what's called stabbing each other with verbal daggers. And it was getting close to leading towards a schism in the community, a complete division. And at one point, the Buddha was called in to give his advice or offer his instruction in that, and he did his best with this group. And what resulted was he enumerated 6 grounds for establishing harmony in a community called the Saraniya Dhammas, the Dhammas that are conducive to harmony, developing harmony. And the teaching he gave was pretty straightforward, but it was something that wasn't taken to very kindly by the groups of monks that were receiving it, but still advice that we refer to over and over again in terms of trying to establish how we can live together communally here, and it applies to everybody. But the first way to establish well-being and harmony with a group of people is to practice continuously with experiencing and having thoughts or let me say portraying or having loving kindness in acts of body and acts of speech and acts of mind, body, speech, and mind, really trying to establish a mind and a heart and bodily action and bodily speech based on metta, loving kindness. So that forms the foundation for communal harmony. And it's important to realize that loving kindness isn't really just kind of a syrupy, going around pretending you love everybody and expressing it in that way, but more of a broad state of mind that results in expressions that are very spacious, very boundless, very broad, very allowing, and giving a lot of clarity and awareness to the fact that we aren't solitary beings, that we live in a space with other beings, and how to be accepting and spacious with whatever it is that comes along, and a lot comes along in a community like this. But particularly starting with the more overt aspects of trying to experience loving kindness with bodily action. One of the nicest examples that I can remember from the suttas is when, and it was after he gave this talk to the monks, and the monks didn't really listen to him. The Buddha got up and left that particular area and went wandering, and came across a group of monks who were living together harmoniously, 3 monks who were living together harmoniously. And he asked them, how did that come about? And they told him, of course, that they were practicing loving kindness in body, speech, and mind with each other, and then talked a little bit about their daily routine. And they had their routines that they would go through, go on alms round in the morning, and when they would come back, the first one who would come back would set up for the meal, and then they would all come together, have their meal, and whoever was the last finished would initiate the cleanup and get that all taken care of. And they would do all of this without speaking to each other. They just kind of intuited what needed to be done, looked out for each other, kept their eyes open, and established an ethic to just support each other and keep their eyes open to what the needs were of the particular community at that time. And particularly with an attitude, as they said, of always trying to set aside what it is that I want to do and doing what my venerable friends want to do. So rather than me first, it's always looking around and saying, well, if we have differences of what we think needs to be done, maybe the most harmonious thing to do would be to let go of what I think needs to be done and do what others would like to do. That's a tall order for some of us, but as a standard, it's a very good one to remember and try and live up to. So in everything we do, we keep our eyes open, we look out for each other. And in our small space here, I think that that's something that we've generally done a pretty good job of, because it's been emphasized and taught, and in a way, it's kind of a matter of survival. If we all want to stay living together, we don't really have the option of a lot of conflict. So we learn how to do that through just keeping our eyes open and giving priority to what others see as a good thing to do. In terms of speech, that's probably one of the hardest areas that any of us, I think, one of the biggest challenges in terms of maintaining harmonious speech. And there are guidelines in the suttas about how to speak honestly, speak at the right time, in the right situation, and with a heart of kindness, an intentional kindness. And that's something that we've all really needed to work and practice on. And one of the ways that's kind of been picked up here since the very early days is coming together every couple of weeks in a group format to just be with each other, not doing business, but coming together as a community. One group as just the bhikkhus, the monks, and another group as the novices and anagarikas and long-term lay residents, to meet every 2 weeks and just share what's going on with our lives on a personal level. And then once every 6 weeks or so coming together as a whole community. And that was started really right in the very beginning, probably by year 2 or 3. It started just after I took my bhikkhu ordination. And it's something that actually Ajahn Siddhanto brought from, he had been part of a fledgling group trying to do some of this at Wat Pah Nanachah in Thailand before he came back here to join the community and establish some kind of ground rules about how to do that, and with a particular emphasis on really listening developing the listening skills to other people and not interrupting, and different qualities of right speech that produced a sense of harmony, or at least of understanding each other as best we could. And pretty much since that time, maybe with just a handful of exceptions, this group has gone on every 2 weeks since that time. And I think we're one of the few, if maybe not the only monastery, who has been able to sustain that. There's been other Western monasteries that have established that for periods of time. But I think Abhayagiri might be the only one that has started it and sustained it for now like probably 23 years. And find that it's just indispensable for keeping our community communication going. Ajahn Yanko referred to practicing nonviolent communication the other day, and we had early on, maybe 4 or 5 years into our community, we had a facilitator come and spend a weekend with us, and she helped teach us some of those skills of nonviolent communication. And maybe a lot of the technical details have kind of faded away over the time, but in a way the spirit remains. Probably could use a refresher on that at some point. But just really emphasizing that, and it doesn't always mean that it's easy. We certainly have had our difficult times and hot spots, but that willingness to step back, listen, and try and understand each other as best we can. And sometimes it doesn't work, and sometimes conflicts can go on for a while, disagreements, but as far as I know, I don't think we've ever had any incidents of people breaking out into physical violence, which isn't always the case. We've been able to get through it without somebody clubbing somebody over the head at this point. But that remains a very strong ethic here, and I think is one reason why we've been able to do so well over the long term. And then, of course, the training of the mind, the practice of developing attitudes of patience. Sometimes I think the teachings that the Buddha gives on the antidote for ill will or aversion being loving kindness is a bit misinterpreted sometimes, because it's very hard in the heat of the moment, if you're in a conflict or if somebody's coming to you with some harsh words and it's causing a sense of anger or irritation to arise in one, it's really hard to just kind of revert to a state of loving kindness. Most people, including myself, aren't all that skilled into just dissolving any kind of irritation that's arising and regarding somebody, kind of pasting loving kindness on top of a situation. And, trying to do that just becomes a bit inauthentic. You can always smile and say, "May you be well," but that's not what you're thinking. So I think that in the heat of the moment, the parami that we need to pull into effect is patience, which Ajahn Sumedho has defined very well as peaceful coexistence with the unpleasant is a good definition of patience. So learning how to just be spacious when there is difficult, unpleasant situations happening. And then the loving kindness, the metta, is something that we have to develop when we're not in the heat of conflict. So before the conflict arises, when we're feeling strong and good, we develop that sense so that more and more over time, when difficult situations do arise, we kind of have had experience with it. We've developed it to at least some extent, that we can pull it into practice rather than trying to invent it right there on the spot. So it's a metta, karuna, the Brahma Viharas are these boundless, spacious states of mind that we develop when we're not necessarily in the heat of the moment, so that we can have them available to us, at least to some extent later on. So loving kindness, those are the three, body, speech, and mind, the three of these bases for communal harmony. And then, quite practically, the Buddha says another basis for communal harmony is acting with generosity, always remembering to give, and to give from one's heart, and to make that an actual conscious practice every day, even to the extent of the content, as he says, the contents of one's alms bowl, passing on what we have, sharing so that each of us has equal opportunity for having the requisites, and that nobody is left without, depending on what is given to the Sangha as a whole. So always maintaining acts of generosity with our companions on a daily basis. And then holding in common the rules of training, the ethical behavior, the guidelines, the precepts that we maintain, particularly those that are oriented towards non-harming, treating each other with respect, and the precepts around right speech, right action, maintaining these qualities. And the sixth one of this set is one that the Buddha refers to as actually the most important of all six, and that's maintaining a commonality in our right view. Basically, right view as is described in the Noble Eightfold Path. That this is one of the most important aspects of living together harmoniously, is kind of having a common basis for what we're doing here together. And this is, in a way, it's particular to the right view, is particular to the Buddha's teachings, and therefore particularly applicable to a monastic community, but also in a household, particularly if you've got a practice of Buddhist meditation and ethics, then bringing these to the fore in how you reflect on the values of your family or your relationships, even if you're lucky to be able to bring it to your workplace. And it doesn't necessarily have to be, as a Buddhist doctrine, because a lot of the aspects of right view can be just picked up as they are without necessarily referring to the Buddhist doctrine. But it helps in a community like this that we have this template. And there's a lot of aspects to right view, both mundane right view and transcendent right view. But in terms of communal harmony, I think a few of the most important things to reflect on and to talk about with each other and to have in common is the aspect of right view that says that our actions have results. Essentially, this is the law of karma. You don't have to use those words, but just have to have this sense and appreciation that what we do and how we speak, how we act, makes a difference. How we think makes a difference. We're not just victims of our own conditioning. Certainly we experience the results of our ways of thinking and speaking and acting in terms of karmic results. But the whole teaching around intention and the fact that we can recognize how our conditioning informs our body and speech and thinking process. And we can see if it's wholesome or healthy or unskillful or skillful. And we can change that. We have the capacity to change. I think that's one of the main things of aspects of right view that helps promote communal harmony. We can look and see how what we're doing affects ourselves, how it affects other people. And if it's not working, we don't have to stay stuck in it. We don't have to judge other people either. We don't have to pigeonhole people. That's so easy to do. We have ways that we perceive other people, and sometimes, we all have our strong patterns and our strong habits, but to assume that they're intractable or to assume that somebody will never change or that we'll never change is a wrong assumption. So that capacity to redirect through mindfulness and really making an effort to change our patterns of thinking and speech and action, and to really experience that and watch what the results are, and to realize that it takes time to do that, and that these old habits can take quite a bit of time to change, but that over time and with right effort, that can be done. So it's interesting that the Buddha points to something like that as a basis for communal harmony, because it is pointing out that we, have that capacity and that others have that capacity. So in a sense, we don't give up on each other. And also, another part of that right view is actually establishing the sense that liberation is possible, that we understand that there is suffering and that there is dissatisfaction, and that the world as it stands doesn't really offer us a very stable, long-term sense of happiness, but that there is that possibility, and that possibility to experience a complete ending of suffering, the ending of dukkha. And with that understanding, that deep conviction, then that's the common value that we all have. If we have that common value, then we use the tools that we have, we use the conditions that we have to keep working towards that and supporting each other doing that. If we didn't have that kind of common belief or common value, that common view, then we'd probably find ourselves going off in many different directions and not being able to live together nearly so harmoniously. And then, of course, the understanding of the Four Noble Truths. This is, of course, our basic teaching. The Buddha calls it the elephant's footprint for all of the teachings. Everything can fit into the Four Noble Truths. So understanding how suffering arises, understanding how it ceases, and following the path leading to that. So these are core basics of this common view that is noble and emancipating, noble and liberating, as the Buddha calls it, as a basis for communal harmony. And we have to keep refreshing that. We have to keep reminding ourselves. We talk about it, we study it, and we talk about how to put it into place. There's in this teaching that he's giving to these monks who are quarreling, he also kind of expounds a little bit on the qualities of people who do practice these 6 Saraniya Dhammas, particularly those in relation to establishing and really experiencing to a deep level this this right view, these qualities of, I was just talking about in terms of the common right view, as a way of reviewing, like, am I somebody who's really putting this into practice, and am I really realizing the results of it? And talks about another set of characteristics or qualities to reflect on and say, well, does this happen in my life? Have I nourished the path to the extent that these qualities or these knowledges have arisen? And it's a good one, I think, for us in a monastic community, and I think we do kind of review these in ourselves and with each other informally, not as necessarily a formal set, but on a regular basis we talk about them. And the first set is just kind of looking at our minds and our meditation practice. We put a lot of emphasis on meditation and the cultivation of the heart, and looking to see if our minds are starting to shed the hindrances, the qualities of obstruction that impede us, the sense desire, the aversion, ill will, the drowsiness, and the agitation and the doubt that Luang Por was talking about in his guided meditation this morning. Looking back at those, and also the qualities of, are we involved in getting in conflict with each other or not, which was pertinent to the situation that the Buddha was addressing at the time. But looking back and reviewing that and saying, does my mind experience freedom from these hindrances? If not all the time, of course, for periods of time. This is one of those reviewing knowledges of somebody who has made some progress on the path through application. It's like you're saying, yes, there have been occasions when my mind is free from these obstructions. And the second quality, which comes as a result of that, is reviewing and asking if one obtains kind of an internal peace of mind, a serenity or a settling. Does the mind seem more relaxed and contented and peaceful than it did before? Not necessarily, again, unbroken samadhi, but is it experiencing that sense of release and peace through application of the heart to settling? So one should ask oneself that question to see if you're going in the right direction. And then another knowledge that arises is do I see any other dispensation other than the Buddhist path that will result in this same goal of liberation? And realizing that really, other than what the Buddha teaches, there are many other spiritual paths, but in terms of a complete relinquishment and complete liberation from existence in samsara, and establishing a true peace of mind that is irrevocable, there really is no other dispensation in the world that will attain that. And that's not meant to be like exclusive or saying that we've got it right and everybody else has got it wrong. And the Buddha was very careful about how he spoke about that. And people would say, well, are you saying that your way is the only way? And he wouldn't say, yes, that's true, my way is the only way. He would say, well, for a person, a being to attain full liberation from samsara, there needs to be all of the factors of the Eightfold Path. So if you've got all of the factors of the Eightfold Path, as I've talked about them, then whatever you call it, whether it's Buddhism or another religion, it will lead to the same place. But if you don't have all of these factors, then it won't lead to complete liberation. So that was his way of establishing that. And if you have that sense, that conviction, then you've essentially established yourself with the faculty of faith. You have complete confidence in the Buddha, the Dhamma, the Sangha. And that's a hallmark of somebody who's firmly on the path to liberation. And I think that people here, I mean, we bring that up as a constant reflection, the establishment of confidence in the path through our own experience, not through just blind belief, but through walking the walk. And I think that there's a strong sense of that faith here in this community that keeps us bound together, walking in the same direction. We have that conviction that this is really a good thing and it really works and it has results. Another one of these factors that is good to reflect on is whenever it is that we do have a transgression of one of our rules, then we immediately, as soon as we see it, as soon as we know that that's happened, we acknowledge it in the presence usually of somebody else, or as soon as possible. And this is a hallmark of somebody who feels quite confident in the path. It doesn't mean that we don't make mistakes, and we all make mistakes, whether it's with our partners or our community that we're living in. You know, there are times when our mindfulness isn't perfect, and we have to acknowledge that. And the best way to do that is to just immediately bring it to the surface and make it known in a public, or at least in a one-to-one way with somebody else. And part of our tradition, and that we hold faithful to, is really keeping a very strict observance of the precepts. And when we do have whenever we do mess up and transgress a rule, at the very least, every 2 weeks, right before the bi-weekly chanting of the Patimokkha rules of discipline, there's a confession where we confess to another monk anything that we can recall that we didn't hold the standard to. So that's built into the system, and I think most of us are quite sensitive to that. So that really helps to acknowledge and to just kind of be transparent. You know, this is a very transparent community. We all kind of know each other's business most of the time, and just try and make it so that it feels comfortable to be able to acknowledge when it is that we mess up. It's not wrong or bad to be a human being and to learn from that. So holding that is in a really high value. Also, something I think that's really pertinent to life here at Abhayagiri is realizing that even if we're somebody who's engaged in a lot of work for the community, doing things, holding positions of responsibility, or in certain monastic offices or certain duties that we have, that even though we're involved with that a lot, we hold in our hearts the recognition and the belief in the practice that leads to what's called the higher mind, the adhicitta. So that even if we're engaged with doing things and not able to spend quite as much time with the formal development of our meditation practice, we use what we've got and what we're doing as the basis for developing skillful, wholesome states of mind, and keep in mind the purpose for the activities that we find ourselves engaged in. And that's just really important in a place like this, where there's a number of things that always need to be done just to keep the community and the property and everything functioning smoothly. To realize that it's not just for the sake of doing a task or making the garden lovely or cooking the best meal or any of those kinds of functional things, but it's always dedicated to the purpose of developing a peace of mind and developing the path. So keeping that value always at the forefront, no matter what we're doing, no matter how engaged we are. And then the last two of these reviewing knowledges would be that when we do have the opportunity to come together and listen to Dhamma teachings and be part of that, that we take full advantage of that. And as the Buddha says, we listen with eager ears. so that we pay attention, listen intently, and really try to take it in and make it part of our inner being, processing it as it comes out. And then lastly, taking that teaching, taking the practice, and finding inspiration from it, really letting it move deeply into our being, and taking delight in it, and remembering that really of all the possible ways of living in the world, having a life that's centered around the realization of Dhamma, and supporting all of the factors and working towards developing all of the factors in our life, our family, our community, that keep that alive, that support that. So we, adapt that or adopt that as our primary MO. This is how we want to operate in life, because we know it's what's going to lead to the highest happiness. And we know that it's not necessarily an easy path, but finding support from each other in our community, in our family, in our monastic sangha, and holding these ways of developing harmony, because this is really, I think the main thing that I've just gotten so much embedded in me over the past 25 years of being here is how rare and how important it is to keep this teaching alive in the world. And I feel so grateful to have been here for all of this time, and in the presence of Luang Pa, who's been here almost since the beginning, and all the others who have come and gone and who are still here, and that strong commitment to keeping together a group of people who really are committed, and committed to being with each other, committed to living with each other, and to the broader community who has been here since before the beginning, to keep this thread alive. This is part of a thread that goes back more than 2,500 years, and I think, of course, it isn't exactly the same as when the Buddha was alive, but it holds a pretty strong thread, and we've resisted, all of the forces of trying to kind of adapt and change in ways that take us too far away from this central thread that takes us all the way back. So, sometimes people, and they do, refer to us as a bit anachronistic, out of pace, that I remember even hearing, in the early days, some members of other meditation communities here on the West Coast saying, well, if you want to see something that's, really really a throwback to to old times that doesn't have much applicability to here and now, go up to Abhayagiri. And it's just realizing that, well, at least there's a thread here, so that, as adaptations occur and adjustments occur, they can pull from our tradition, but there's still this thread that goes all the way back with authenticity that people can, periodically dip into. And it just, it's a living tradition that I find I'm just filled with gratitude to be able to be part of. So I don't know how much longer it will last. I hope a long time. We don't know what's going to happen in terms of the world around us, and fires, and we've had 2 fires across the valley just this past month or so, and luckily they were contained. We had another one a few years ago that came onto the property but spared us, so far so good, but we don't really know how long it's all going to last. and just have to be ready to pick up and move on if things change. But in the meantime, to really take advantage of what we've got and nourish our community and keep on practicing towards that goal. So I think I'll leave it there for now. Here comes Santideva.
Hannamayang Dhammakataya Sadhukarang Dadamase.
Sadhu, 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 anumodam.
Thank you, Ajahn Kurunadamo. And we'll take a brief break and do more walking meditation. Of course, people are welcome to keep sitting if they like, but also there will be the opportunity to meet at the bell tower and do the forest walk, or to just do walking meditation back and forth here in the cloister area. take a 15-minute break and come back for the Q&A session at 3:45 California time. So it'll be Longpor today, heading up the Q&A session. Something I didn't really have a chance to, or time to include in the slideshow was some little videos from over the years. There's a good video of the little house being destroyed and by an excavator who just pulled it apart, knocked it down. They brought a huge truck. They just dumped the house in this big, just like picked the roof off and dumped it in this big truck. Took it away. We knew it was time to tear the house down when one winter we didn't realize that the roof was leaking into a room known as above the room known as the annex, which used to be the abbot's office, the Ajahn Pasino Ajahn Amaro abbot's office, which then, when we had these new office buildings, that became the lay annex, where people could have breakfast and hang out. And then, I believe it was the winter of 2015, just after the mealtime, the drywall from the ceiling, it turned out there was a leak in the roof we didn't know about, and it was leaking and just soaking this kind of asbestos insulation above the drywall, and it was just getting heavier and heavier, and then it just kind of like, just like a giant wet glop, just all the drywall was just soaked and it just fell off, and luckily nobody was sitting in there at the time. I think it was during dish cleanup. And because it was asbestos, we had to have the hazardous waste disposal crew come out, and they covered that part of the house with black bags, and it looked really official, like an official toxic hazardous waste situation. And so although it was like a feeling of maybe missing the house, I think it was the best to actually get rid of it, tear it down. Also, for a long time, we had a little library in that house, which got more and more crowded with books and bookshelves. And Debbie's office was a closet in that library. It was a closet with the door taken off. And that was her office for the longest time.
There could fit a little desk in the chair that she sat in. The desk protruded into the room.
The chair protruded into the room. So you had to, if you wanted to go into the library, you might run into her chair if she was working at her office. But then in 2005, started building these office buildings, kind of kitty corner to us. Finished in 2006, and that was the Sanghapala office, the current monk's office, the current abbot's office, and also those public restrooms. That was all one big project. off are the questions from yesterday. There's just 3 that weren't answered. They're circled in purple. And then the new ones are under that. There's not nearly as many. And then those are from the bowl.
Okay, so today's Q&A. So we have a few left over to from yesterday. Okay. What can I do to stop judging? For example, when looking at the list of food people will bring to a gathering, instantly think why she brings that, or how come he always provides good food. Thank you, Bante. As, say, bottom line Buddhist practice, suffering. It's just such a complication to be judging, and why it's dear Luang Por. So yeah, I mean that's just pay attention to the suffering and let that go. Dear Luang Por, thank you for your talk today. You mentioned giving the opportunity for everyone to practice and train. However, there seems to be no Ajahn Chah monasteries in US and Canada where women can ordain and train. Would Abhayagiri be open to having a female monastic community at some point in the future? I mean, one of the things, and I actually mentioned that we began without an idea to have provide that opportunity for ordination, mainly because of coming from Thailand, from the Ajahn Chah tradition. It's very conservative, and it is, and it ends up being difficult. One of the things that I've made a point of doing is helping to provide support and encouragement for communities that are training women. Say like tomorrow, the Dhammadri community will be coming, and I mean that's been an ongoing relationship for a long time. Since they're establishing, just recently I went down to help the Karuna Buddhist Vihara, myself and Ajahn Yaniko, to help them out in their establishing of their community, so that trying to give encouragement and support in that way. In England they have the Siladhara community, which they're, I mean, it's a very good standard of training. It's a very good opportunity, but I think it's much more difficult for that to be accepted here in America. And in fact, there was a beginning attempt to do that, but because it's not a full bhikkhuni ordination, then it ran into problems and difficulties. So that I'm happy to support communities that are developing, but I'm also keen to support the female monastic communities that are autonomous, as opposed to having, say, like a community that is like dual communities. So that's where I am and where we are these days. And we've been trying to encourage that training, and also we have there's been women who have been practicing and training here who have gone to other places in order to train, and we encourage that. Try to support as best we can. But I'm trying to keep it fairly, that sense of having autonomous communities. Okay, the next one, 11. I remember reading in one of Ajahn Chah's books about comparing our feeling to a snake. Sadness, unhappiness at its head, happiness as its tail, and how we should not touch it, any part of its body. My question is, how do we go about investigating our natural state of mind when we encounter this snake or our feelings on a daily basis? In other words, how can we just watch it comes in and out of our mind without interacting with it or getting influenced by it? Again, it comes back to dukkha and suffering, in that sense of because it isn't as if we just set an intention. I'm going to watch this come in and out of my mind, and I'm not going to get influenced by it. It affects us. And we go up and down in various ways, in our moods and our impressions. And what does that feel like? Are we willing to learn from our experience? Can we give ourselves the opportunity to understand so the benefits and drawbacks of both, say, happiness and unhappiness, because it's not as if it's absolutely one or the other. Okay, so then we'll go to the questions that were from here, from the question bowl. What is the meaning of the inscription on the Buddha statue behind you? And that is Buddha Abhayagiri Shakyamuni. So it's common to when one commissions a Buddha image to be made, say whether it's casting it or carving it, like this one was carved, then to request a respected elder to give it a name. It's sort of like an auspicious naming that. So this was given to us by Ajahn Jandi, He gave this. And then the Buddha in the hall, which is our first Buddha image that we had commissioned for Abhayagiri. And that one was cast, and it was the name was given by the former Sangaraja. Next question. A sense of causeless joy permeates awareness, yet there remains a sense of a me that experiences. How to dissolve that? I think one of the things is one is to see or to feel, to experience the limitation that we do experience when we feel we have to dissolve it. It's like, I got to do something about this. Because it reeks of me. And so then it's perpetuated. So it's that sense of just feeling the limitation, feeling the kind of the cramping of the joy and the awareness that comes with me. So that it's just being able to recognize that, and then there's quite a natural inclination to relax or release around that. Ajahn, please explain why the monks keep the eyes closed during meditation. What is the practice? How about with open eyes or half open? Is it the same practice? I think a lot of it is personal preference. It's not mandated, and then also it can be adjusted, adapted to different times. It's but it's personally for mostly I keep my eyes closed. It just is it's a way of limiting the tendency to go to the sense door and to turn inwards. As that's so it's a helpful aid in collecting awareness or collecting attention, so that one doesn't get drawn out too much. Sometimes, especially if one's meditating at night or meditating with, this morning I talked about hindrances, and being able to have recognizing, okay, maybe dullness or that sleepiness is coming up. So then it's helpful to either half open the eyes or open the eyes. Just that added impingement helps to keep the mind alert. Or it could be just the hindrance of restlessness, and closing the eyes helps to that. So it's just having options in one's toolkit of working with the mind and working with the hindrances. how do you recognize when craving has arisen? I think one of the things that tends to happen with craving is just there's an energy there that is either that feeling of unfulfilled, or that feeling of seeking, that feeling of movement, and that's a helpful sign to pay attention to when you're saying, oh, because oftentimes it's unformed. I mean, it's easy when it's got a clear object and it's okay, that's craving, but oftentimes especially when it's a bit subtle, then it's more it's that movement of mind, that seeking, and so it's looking for an object. So then that is the craving itself, the actual movement. When practicing letting go, is there any particular order in doing so? For example, if I am attached to career, friends, and family, in order of increasing attachment, should I first let go of career, least attachment, then let go of friends, higher attachment, finally let go of family, highest attachment? Or does order of letting go not matter, and I can randomly pick letting go of something different each day? It's wherever it arises, you let it go there. In the same way that wherever say like a fire bursts out, that's where you squirt your fire extinguisher. I mean, it doesn't have to be in any particular order. It's sort of wherever kind of defilements, attachment arise, that's where you work with it. If everything in life is great, and I am enjoying my life, why practice? What could get better? Okay, fine. What could get better is that you could actually become peaceful and wise. That could be better. And in the sense, and also that say practice isn't just for say the making your life better in a sense. I mean, that's a knock-on effect, but it's for the cultivation of qualities that have both an effect in the present, but into the future, so that the cultivation of virtue or integrity, the cultivation of generosity and patience, or cultivation of mindfulness and discernment, those are all qualities that have a benefit in the present, have a benefit into the future. We develop those fundamental character qualities. It also has the sense of, say, practice is not just for something, say, for this life, because there's a recognition that this life is also fraught with the limitation of aging, of illness, of death, of separation from everything that we know and we're familiar with, and there is from a, say, fundamental aspect of right view and a Buddhist perspective, is that there is this life, there is a future life, there is a next life. And preparing for that, preparing for the ending of this life, preparing for a future life in a way that one is creating the conditions for a continuity of clarity and understanding. So that's an important element. So it works on many levels. How do you feel the wholes? How do you feel good without the need for anything external / addictions? In other words, coping mechanisms. How do you deal with and move past what lies underneath these mechanisms? I think that's one of the things, that's what, say, like that mindfulness and reflection and wisdom is for understanding how those fundamental mechanisms of coping, fundamental mechanisms of being able to either deflect difficult feelings or to be overwhelmed by difficult feelings, experiences, to be distracted by desires and attachments. So it's so much of practice is learning how to pay attention to the being willing to look a bit more deeply than the surface experience. And that's why the Buddha's brilliance in using dukkha as a tool to recognize not just sort of feelings of overwhelming suffering, but just feelings of just niggling stress, niggling dis-ease, boredom. So all of the things that are, they're not, it's not life-threatening or earth-shattering to be bored, but it's a symptom of that, or a slight agitation. There's that willingness to look at the range of our emotion and experience and try to reflect and understand it more clearly. Should we consider the Brahma-viharas a form of emotion, or are they kinds of knowledge or understanding? I wouldn't consider an either-or situation. They are a form of emotion in a sense, and that's one of the teachers in our tradition uses, translate the Brahma-viharas, loving kindness, compassion, sympathetic joy, equanimity, as mature emotions. And that's a very, very, that's a really valid way of looking at it. But they're also a kind of knowledge and understanding that allows a response of kindness or compassion or joy or equanimity, because one has a certain understanding of one's own mind and of the world around one. So then it's not an either-or answer. I've got one here. specifically addressed to Ajahn Yaniko, but if you want, I can answer it. It's pretty simple. Yeah, okay. This one's addressed to Ajahn Yaniko, but I got the floor today, so I'll steal his thunder today. Can you please talk more about the three happinesses and what should we be careful about? So that those, it was from a question the other day that Ajahn Yaniko answered about the three happinesses that are in it's in the dedication of merit, blessing, sharing of blessings chant. And it's sort of the like present happiness or worldly happiness, heavenly happiness, and the happiness of Nibbana. So those, and I think one of the things is that the Buddha is makes an important point in the sense of we should be careful about cultivating and developing all the different forms of happiness that we can do. Not in a kind of searching through desire and attachment and clinging and compulsion, but recognizing that there is happiness in all the different elements of our life of practice and living a skillful life, and it's really important to attend to those forms of happiness. So that, say, this morning, I talked about the working with the five hindrances in meditation, but to view them as a doorway or a natural way of creating happiness, because we step back from obstructions in the mind, stepping back from desire, ill wills, sloth and torpor, restlessness and worry, skeptical doubt, and the Buddha said there's a happiness that comes, the keeping of precepts and having a sense of integrity and virtue in our life is a basis of happiness, both in terms of personal happiness and then also social happiness, where we have our social relations are really a source of well-being. And so, and then you think in terms of heavenly happiness, just refining the degrees of happiness that we have, and the happiness of not clinging to anything at all, the happiness of Nibbana. Okay, we get to today's questions from the Zoom people. I have loaned something to my brother and he just won't give it back to me, no matter how many times I ask him. How would you approach this situation? How should I handle this? Well, you could just give up. That's a way of okay. But it also depends what it is. Sometimes you have to take into account how much, what's underlying it, in terms of, can one, rather than just pestering them about what you've loaned, starting a conversation about what's underlying it? What's the reason? Is there some sort of reason? Is there some? Does he have some kind of does he have some kind of difficulty that he's not willing to give it back? Does he even have it? Has he lost it? There's all sorts of so just even starting a conversation as to so that might get a better understanding of what the situation is. So there's that sense, okay, just giving up on it and forgetting about it. That's one way, or starting a conversation, or being very aggressive. Take them to court. That's very American. You can do. You've got a whole range of options, but what is it that's going to actually be useful for oneself? Because if it's something that is really important to you, then you have to figure out a skillful way to address the situation. Getting in somebody's face is usually not a good way to find resolution. Reflecting on how to approach it skillfully, so that's something to be considering. And sort of, how should I handle this in a black and white, right and wrong way? But what kind of outcome am I hoping for? Because there's the outcome of actually getting whatever you loan, but then there's also outcome in terms of relationship with a family member, and those are important considerations, and they might be at odds with each other. So it's reflecting on that a bit more thoroughly or skillfully, and then identifying, say, what outcome one would like, and then say, well, what kind of approach is actually needed, and how to work with it so that particular outcome might arise. Okay, next one. Have you ever suffered from some sort of addiction, and how did you recover from it? What would be your advice to some suffering from an addiction? I guess I wasn't in the world long enough to have a real addiction. I ended up in a monastery pretty young, so, and even the minor addiction that I did have was say like smoking cigarettes. That's an addiction, and they're just not in the monastery, so they weren't there. It was I didn't have to think about it, which is not that's not much advice. But one of the things I would, certainly in terms of addiction, I would, and on a certain level, as human beings, we are addicted to all sorts of things, and even if you're in a monastery, there's kind of addictive personalities, and our addictions to sense gratification, addiction to affirmation of self. Those are, they're refined, but those are addictions. And I think one of the things that the advice for somebody suffering from an addiction, I mean, one, and especially if it's, it is suffering that it's important to seek the help and support of others, in the sense that, say, like AA, Alcoholics Anonymous, provides really good. So I mean, they've got decades and decades of experience with alcohol and dealing with alcoholism, and support systems and mentors, and that's it's having others to help to support, help to reflect back to us, help to give us encouragement. So that's that sense of reaching out to others. In the Buddhist world, there's a movement of refuge recovery, which is using, because sometimes they, like AA, they use a theistic model, which is a bit not so comfortable for some people. So then using some of those aspects, but also using the traditional forms of Buddhist practice to help support people who do have addictions, and using sort of recovery, using refuges and the tools of a Buddhist practice, which is really skillful. But so the main thing, I think, is seeking out and reaching out to others who do have experience and who do have difficulty, because it's, especially with addiction, one of the helpful supports is people who have gone through something similar to oneself. They will both be, tend to be empathetic and supportive, and they'll also, because they've been through it, they've seen it, they can oftentimes call you on your kind of obfuscations, that because that's one of the things, addictive personality is, it's just looking around for it gets looking for any angle to justify and seek a gratification. So it's being called on that, so it's really helpful. So having somebody who will actually point out ways that one is getting lost. So yeah, reaching out to people is really important. And say on so those are groups. I'm sure on. Yeah, so that's a skillful way, but also finding so that in terms of one's own motivation, I mean, addiction is looking for something that is, I mean, we gratifying. So then turning to reflection and investigating, well, what is actually, say, a more satisfying experience of well-being and happiness that doesn't have the complications of the object of addiction. So that's something, is paying attention to happiness and well-being. And certainly the Dhamma practice is really helpful for that. Could you please explain how one practices applied and sustained thought in breath meditation, vitaka vichara? Thank you. An easy way of applying is just basically referring to Ajahn Chah, who would say, vitaka is like the lifting up of attention to the sensation of the breath. That's vitaka, the lifting up of attention. And vichara is the sustained thought around the experience. So then, one lifting up attention to the experience, vichara, that looking at it from different angles so that one gets a sustained perspective on the breath. Inevitably, one gets distracted. Then it's vitaka again. You use that vitaka to lift up the attention to the breath, and then so it's like using that vitaka vichara to work with the breath and mindfulness. It's 4:29. I'll take a easy question. There's be a couple questions left over. Venerable Ajahn, can you please explain why the Ajahn holds a fan in front of him during the taking of refuges? Thank you. So that's in some monasteries. Very rarely do we do that here. But there is...
Katina's the only time we ever do that.
Maybe Katina's the only time. But even then, it's oftentimes that's during the Katina chant as opposed to the...
People are looking at the sides of us. We're just hiding from each other.
Right. Yeah, hiding so you can have the chanting behind the fan.
Put the chanting on the back.
Anyway, in traditional or classical Theravada countries, when an Ajahn is giving refuges and precepts, and also it used to be even giving a Dhamma talk. The purpose of using a fan, oftentimes there's a symbol or a little Dhamma saying on those fans. They're ceremonial fans, and a lot of it, as I understand it, is that those were ways of keeping the position of the elder impersonal, so that the person was a representative of the Buddha Dhamma Sangha, was a representative of the religion rather than, say, an individual, a personality who was either giving a talk or... And similar with the, the Parita chanting would often be that as well. So in certainly the funeral ceremonies, like informal, again, oftentimes it's in Bangkok monasteries where there'll be the funeral chanting and they'll use the fan in front. So a lot of it is to keep it from personalizing the presence and encouraging the sense of is a representative of the religion or the Dhamma, as opposed to an individual. That's how I understand it. Okay, 4:32.
All right. So, thank you. Thank you, Luang Por. Thank you, Luang Por. We'll close with the chant on page 33 of Chanting Book Volume 1, and then there'll be maybe a couple announcements after that. Verses of sharing and aspiration. Now let us chant the verses of sharing and aspiration. Through the goodness that arises from my practice, may my spiritual teachers and guides of great virtue, my mother, my father, and my relatives, the sun and the moon, and all virtuous leaders of the world, may the highest gods and evil forces, celestial beings, guardian spirits of the earth, and the Lord of death, may those who are friendly, indifferent, or hostile, may all beings receive the blessings of my life. May they soon attain the threefold bliss and realize the deathless through the goodness that arises from my practice. And through this act of sharing, may all desires and attachments quickly cease, and all harmful states of mind, until I realize Nibbana in every kind of birth. May I have an upright mind, with mindfulness and wisdom, austerity and vigor. May the forces of delusion not take hold, nor weaken my resolve. The Buddha is my excellent refuge. Unsurpassed is the protection of the Dhamma. The solitary Buddha is my noble guide. The Sangha is my supreme support. Through the supreme power of all these, may darkness and illusion be dispelled. Arahang Samma Sambuddho Bhagava, the Lord, the perfectly enlightened and blessed one, Buddhang Bhagavantang Abhivademi. I render homage to the Buddha, the blessed one. The teaching of Swakato Bhagavata Dhammo, the teaching so completely explained by him, Dhammang Namasami, I bow to the Dhamma. Supatipanno Bhagavato Sawaka Sangho, the Blessed One's disciples who have practiced well, Sanghang Namami, I bow to the Sangha.